Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Studio. My name is Adam, and it's time for another Technique Talk.
I recall Central Park in fall. Not a shame.
Thank you so much to my studio VIPs, Carl Spence, Luke Uyemura, and Christopher Allen. Thank you for being on the VIP team. And our studio featured artist for today is Sam Kelly. Thank you so much for supporting Sam. And if you want to become a studio VIP or studio artist, you can go to patreon.com/Adam10, or you can click over here. BIRCH vs Rattan. A lot of you guys have been asking me, what is the benefit of using BIRCH? What is the benefit of using rattan? Why would anyone want to use rattan? Before I start this video, I want to say 3 quick things. Firstly, don't let anyone tell you what kind of shaft you should choose. This video is meant to help you decide, but at the end of the day, it is your decision, because I think, just like with mallets, shaft choice is ultimately a personal preference. Secondly, I'm aware that there are other types of shafts on the market. I know that there are bamboo shafts for timpani mallets, for example. There's carbon fiber shafts, there's phenolic tubes. Innovative Percussion uses cedar shafts instead of birch for the Zivkovic mallets, which is basically the same as birch anyway. But just for the simplicity of this video, we're going to focus on the 2 main ones, which are birch and rattan. So think of it as hardwood versus softwood. And the third thing that I wanted to say is there are also interchangeable terms for the shafts. Some people call them handles. I know Encore Mallets calls shafts handles, rattan handles, birch handles. But I think shafts, handles, they're all the same thing. So anyway, I hope this video helps. This is birch versus rattan. Birch is my personal favorite kind of shaft. It is a hard wood, so it's very, very stiff, and you generally find birch mostly on marimba mallets. You might find it on some vibraphone mallets, you might find it on some suspended cymbal mallets, but ultimately marimba tends to be the most frequently used mallet for birch shafts. So one of the reasons why you might choose a birch shaft is because of the stiffness. It's very stable. Because of the stiffness of the shafts, you always feel like you're more stable in 4 mallet grips. You'll notice that every time I do a stroke, the shafts follow my exact stroke movement. So there's no delay, there's no wobble, nothing like that. I always feel like I'm directly in control of the mallets. And this extra stability is really good for giving you confidence as a player. For example, if you're a beginner and you're just learning how to use 4 mallet, it's really good to know that the mallets aren't gonna go woo 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 woo. And if you're an advanced player and you're playing some really tricky passages, it's really good to know that, you know, if you want to really get that A flat, you just go boom, and you know the mallet's gonna be right there. It's not gonna be there, it's not gonna be there. So stability is the first advantage. The second advantage of birch mallets is longevity. Now what I mean by longevity is that birch shafts are stiff and straight and true, which means they don't flex over time. So they are going to remain straight and you can use them for quite a long time without the shaft warping in any sort of way. So if you want a mallet with a shaft that is not going to bend, a birch shaft is the way to go. The third thing that I think is an advantage with birch shafts is smooth ends. Now, if you've watched any of my previous mallet reviews, you'll know every time I look at the end of a shaft, I always say a phrase. I believe it starts with the letter S and also ends with the letter S. Smooth ends make friends. Because birch as a wood can be smoothed out really nicely, whether it's with sandpaper or with professional tools. And a lot of birch mallets that I have, even the cheaper birch mallets, they tend to have these really nice rounded out edges, which is really good for preventing chafing and blistering in this area of the hand. A lot of you guys keep saying, how do I prevent those calluses over here? If you have smooth ends, it's not going to happen. And if you have birch shafts, it's more likely you'll have smooth ends make friends. And the final advantage that birch shafts have, in my opinion, is grip. If you're not a fan of using mallet tape like I am, and you really like having your mallets naked, so to speak, birch wood is textured. It has a slight grain to it when you feel it, and that's why people use it for furniture and things like that. And it works really well for shafts because that added texture gives you additional grip. Especially when you're doing Stevens grip, you can feel a little bit of roughness. That might help you grip onto the mallet a little bit easier. Having that additional grip might be something that you like. So those are the main advantages of a wood like birch. This also applies to cedar. But what are the disadvantages? As much as I like birch, I know there are a few disadvantages. And the first one, I think you guys know exactly what I'm going to bring up right now. The first disadvantage of birch mallets is that they are prone to snapping. So I bring up this story every single time. I brought it up in the previous episode as well, that I broke my Zivkovic mallets. As you can see, this is one end and this is the other end. It was really, really sad. I don't think I've used enough Rob Nopper memes to tell you how disappointed I am about this, but...
You know that feeling. I know you know that feeling.
So if you imagine standing on a skateboard, for example, if a skateboard was made of something like birch and you jumped onto it, because it's so stiff, the structural integrity wouldn't allow it to bend and absorb the shock from the jump. So it would just go pfft. Whereas if it was made of a more flexible wood like bamboo or something, it would bend and it would absorb the shock and come back up. Any sort of force that comes in at an angle like this or this or this is just gonna go psh, and then your mallets are gone.
Oh no!
This particular example happened when I clicked two Zivkovic mallets together, and for some reason I clicked it really high up and it went psh, like that. It was really sad. The second disadvantage of birch is both a blessing and a curse. So the disadvantage is you end up using more effort. If you've ever played a very fast, technical, virtuoso type passage with two mallets that are made of birch, and then played the same passage with two mallets that are made of rattan, you'll immediately notice the difference. The birch is slowing you down because it has to follow your stroke all the way. But with rattan mallets, you literally just go whoop, and the whole mallet goes psh. So you can put in less effort and get more rebound with the rattan shafts. Whereas the birch shafts tend to just absorb all the shock and you have to do all the work yourself. Now, of course, it doesn't matter how good your mallets are or what kind of shafts you're using. Good technique will always destroy good hardware. Like someone who plays with birch mallets but has really, really good technique and really good skill and really good musicality will always be able to deliver no matter what kind of mallets they're using. But it's just that if you're looking for that extra edge of speed or extra edge of power, birch may hold you back ever so slightly, so something to consider. Another disadvantage of birch is the textured wood. Now, I said the textured wood was good because it gave you grip, but it's also bad because it is abrasive, and as a result, you end up getting the famous scallops. Now, of course, there are measures to protect this. If you've checked out my channel, you know I have a tutorial on taping your mallets with tennis tape. You also know that I have a tutorial on preventing blisters using toe protectors. You can check that all out in the description below. But ultimately, if you like using your mallets naked, so to speak,
Yeah.
then you might have a few problems with blisters. So something to consider again. But overall, I think birch mallets are really good ultimately for people who are looking for stability. They're very stable shafts. They're very reliable. They don't warp over time. So if you're like a beginner and you've only just started learning marimba and you're unsure, birch is generally the safer option to go. But remember, good technique will always destroy good gear. So that's what I like about birch mallets. Let me know in the comments if you're team birch. But for now, we're gonna move on to rattan mallets. Rattan comes from the Malay word rotan, and if you are from Malaysia or you have Malaysian parents or Malaysian relatives or Malaysian friends, you'll know that rotan usually means cane, as in the thing that your parents would hit you with when you didn't practice enough piano. I have fond memories of my parents hitting me with a rotan, and it was not pretty. But one thing I did notice about the famous rotan is that it never broke. It never snapped, it just always went. So rattan is a very strong and flexible wood, and other than being used for canes so your mother can smack you, it's also used for things like wicker furniture, wicker baskets, like they wrap the rattan really tightly and you get a really nice chair, a really nice basket. And of course we use it a lot in percussion mallets, especially for keyboard mallets. Now the main reason why anyone would use rattan is for the flexibility, and the flexibility offers a few advantages. The first advantage of using rattan is that you get a lot more power with less effort. If you imagine using a whip, for example, like a big, long rope, and you wanted to use that as a whip, you go whoosh. Now because the rope is flexible, all you need is a little bit of energy at the start of the rope, whoosh, and then the rope comes smacking down with a lot of force. Now if you imagine doing that same whip motion, but with a really hard, solid piece of wood, two things would happen. Firstly, you'd have to use your entire strength to get maybe about half of the power you got with the rope, and also the wood would snap in half, so not very effective. So rattan definitely lets you play faster and with more power, but with less effort. The second advantage of rattan is that it has this very clear, smooth finish, and this is uniform across all kinds of shafts. I don't think I've ever come across a rattan shaft that wasn't smooth. What this means is that you will never ever get a blister from using rattan mallets, and it makes it easier to use in cross grip as well. I would demonstrate it, except I can't do cross grip Sorry. The third advantage of rattan shafts is that they are very flexible, which means they will not snap. Rattan shafts are extremely difficult to break because they are so flexible. Just like the skateboard example I had before, it is very hard to break rattan mallets in the same way you would break a birch shaft. Whenever you feel like these are close to breaking, they just keep bending and bending and bending, and as a result you have a shaft that is pretty much indestructible. So definitely a lot of great advantages of rattan. Now for the disadvantages. The first advantage I said, which was the fact that you can get more with less effort, is also a curse for some people because that means there's less stability, because the mallets tend to wiggle more in your hands and they are more likely to go out of control, which I suppose is more of a problem for beginners and for people just trying to get their chops up. But it's also a problem for people who are playing really tricky pieces or really big intervals and they want some extra stability, and rattan's not giving them any of that. So if you're a player that prefers stability, you may not like these. Secondly, even though I said it was an advantage that the shafts are smooth, it's also a disadvantage if you tend to sweat in your hands or if you get nervous a lot, because as a result, it's very slippery. There's nowhere near as much grip with rattan mallets as there are with birch mallets, and that was kind of one of the reasons why I switched, was because I couldn't be bothered taping my rattan mallets, and every time we were playing in our ensemble's performance, my rattan mallets would just go whoop, 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 and at one point I was playing like holding it by the very edge, like please don't let go, please don't let go. So if you want extra grip, you can tape the ends of your mallets, but otherwise it is a little bit slippery. The next disadvantage is that even though I said the shafts are smooth, the ends are not smooth. Most rattan ends will look like this. They have this black end, which I think is because if you cut rattan, it tends to be quite sharp, and so they fill it with this black compound, which is kind of chalky and it's quite rough, and as a result, you end up getting these blisters that happen in the middle of your hand, and it's not very nice. All the rattan shafts that I have seem to have this finish on the bottom. I'm not really sure why they can't just make it into something a little bit smoother. Obviously, there are ways around this. You can tape around the end, or you can put a rubber grommet on it or something like that. But for those people who don't like playing with grommets, with tape or whatever, it's a bit tricky. The next thing that I think is a disadvantage, which again is related to the fact that yes, rattan shafts will not snap, but they will bend over time. Now this is the Tony Michelli mallets from Mike Bolter, and I've had this vibraphone mallet for quite a while. I use it quite a lot, and you can start to see there's quite a bit of a bend. Do you see that? It's sort of bending this way a little bit, and it's not immediately noticeable because this shaft is actually quite well built. It's quite thick, but for thinner rattan shafts, like on xylophone mallets especially, like I used to have a set of IP902s from Innovative Percussion, the James Ross red xylophone mallets, and they were quite bent after a season of playing with them because they just didn't hold up and the shafts were quite thin. Yes, even though rattan shafts are practically indestructible, they are susceptible to warping, so watch out for that. And finally, one of my pet hates about rattan mallets, especially if you're using them for cross grip or Burton, is this. The famous rattan click. The rattan click is unavoidable because of the clear, smooth finish of rattan. It makes that really clicky sound. So if you're using a grip that relies a lot on cross grip, you need to be very careful with it. I know a lot of people love using cross grip with rattan mallets, so it's just one of those things, but something to consider. Overall, I would recommend rattan mallets to people looking for a more flexible mallet, something that is more bendy and requires less effort. There's definitely less control, but you get more power. So if you're looking for that, rattan might be the one. Now obviously I can't tell you which shaft is objectively better because there is no objectively better shaft. Just like with all mallet selection, it is completely up to your personal preference, and shafts more than anything else are for ergonomics. They don't affect the sound, they don't really affect the look of the mallet so much, it's more to do with the feel. Because it's the only thing that connects your hand to the mallet, to the instrument, so it's important to get a feel for the sort of shaft that you like. And remember, there are virtuosos and beastly players who play on both ends of the spectrum. For example, Pius Cheng tends to use rattan mallets, Van Sice tends to use birch mallets. So there are people all around the world who use different types of mallets, different types of shafts. Find what is best for you. So I'd be really interested to know, I'm sure a lot of other people would be interested to know as well. Let me know in the comments below, what shafts do you use? Are you team birch? Are you team rattan? Are you team neither? Do you use like fiberglass or something fancy? Do you use multiple types of mallets? Let me know in the comments below because I'd love to hear from you. And of course, if you have any suggestions for the show or you want to see anything from me or you have any other questions, let me know in the comments below as well. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. It would mean the world to me. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that red subscribe subscribe button below to keep up with my uploads. And of course, thank you to the people who suggested today's episode. Thank you to everyone who keeps sending me in all of these suggestions. I really appreciate it. It helps me keep the show fresh and interesting, and ultimately for you guys. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode, and I will see you next week for another episode of The Studio. Good night.